This story is called Cheating. Flight attendant wants an open relationship. I have never been to a forum. I am 48 years old and my wife is 44 and we have been married for 15 years. We had a good relationship, at least I thought we did. But it has been almost 2 years since we have had any real intimacy. My wife had some childhood trauma way back when. I won't say what it was, but it's affected her for a good portion of her life. But with therapy, she has been able to overcome most of it. One of the reasons we didn't have any kids was why she was going to therapy. She was on quite a bit of medication. Some of this medication has some serious side effects, but she really didn't have many setbacks from the medication before my wife became a flight attendant. She was helping her father run a gas station. They had a falling out because she wanted more money. Her becoming a flight attendant came out of nowhere. She had lunch with a friend of hers who was a flight attendant and told her how lucrative the position can be. She told my wife that when she became a flight attendant, they started her out at $35,000 per year. But she told my wife the downside to being a flight attendant: it's hard to maintain a relationship. In most cases. After that meeting, my wife and I talked about it, since my wife had the necessary educational requirements. And I think the airlines required some additional schooling and training. She applied at 4 different airlines: Delta, United Airlines, Frontier Airlines and Southwest Airlines. Delta was the only one that hired her. At first I was happy for her. She was making about the same as I was making at the time, and she kept getting raises every year. It seemed substantial raises. But what I didn't know then is that this job came with a price. My wife was gone a lot. I mean, it seemed like she was going every day, only coming home for a few days at a time. When she was home, she wasn't really present. I couldn't figure out why. After about the 3rd year of her being a flight attendant is when I noticed her behavior slightly shifting. She would come home and we would have a few days of bliss, but it seemed like the 2nd week she was back home, she would start to get strange. Not only did her behavior change, her spending habits also changed. She was buying a lot of sexy clothes, but I didn't see her in those clothes. I started to get suspicious, but I didn't want to accuse her of anything. I wanted to make sure before I confront her with indisputable evidence. So as the weeks and months go by, she is still traveling, coming home, not touching me, and spending lots of money on clothing. Well, I had lunch with a friend one day and told him what was happening. He travels quite a bit himself, and he honestly said, "I don't know what I can tell you." Then he said, "If she is cheating on you away from home, how will you find out?" He said, "Hiring a private investigator may be your only option, but it's going to be expensive." He was right. I knew it would be expensive. So I called around to a few places, actually found a husband and wife team that were private investigators after work. I went to see them and told them all of my suspicions. She wasn't initiating anything with me in the bedroom, buying clothes and not wearing them in front of me. Then this guy's wife said, "What does she do for a living?" I said she's a flight attendant. She shakes her head and said, "Sir, I don't have a good feeling about what you told me." My heart just sank after she said that. I told them I needed to find out what was going on. They gave me their price. It would cost me almost $7,000 to follow her while she was traveling and get the video footage I needed. They told me to go home and think about it and get back to them when I have the opportunity. I went back home. And to my surprise, my wife wanted to talk to me, and it wasn't pleasant. She basically told me, not in so many words, she was not happy with our sex life and wanted to explore an open relationship. I said, "What the hell do you mean?" She says, "I want to see other men." I basically told her, "No way. I am not doing that." Then she says, "So you want me to be unhappy with our boys' sex life?" I said, "No, I don't want you to be unhappy. but I am not willing to accept that I am not participating in an open relationship. Well, as you guessed it, that conversation didn't resolve anything. We went to bed, not speaking to one another. That night, the next day, I met with the husband and wife team that are private investigators and pay them their fee of $7,000. The husband was going to stay behind and his wife was going to travel and do the surveillance on my wife. I told him my wife is leaving on a certain day. I gave them a picture of her, what kind of car she drove and where she usually hangs out when she is home over the next few days before she was due to travel. Again, the surveillance showed her on her cell phone a lot and going to the mall on occasion, mostly by herself. On the day she was traveling, the private investigator sent me a text showing my wife walking next to a man and they were walking rather quickly. I assumed to make sure they made the flight. The private investigator simply asked me, "Did I know this man?" I simply replied that I didn't. So the private investigator sent me a text saying from that point on, she was documenting everything and would be in touch as soon as they landed later that night. The private investigator said that my wife and the same guy she boarded the plane with went to a hotel which had a bar in it. They had drinks and then went up to the hotel room together. The next day, the private investigator sent me a text saying that my wife had checked out of the hotel by herself at around 11 in the morning. But she said that wasn't enough. She wanted to get them together, embracing, kissing, something. Words that I didn't want to hear. But my gut was telling me she was cheating while the private investigator was telling me all this. I still had to somehow focus at work. I work as a computer analyst and my job is stressful enough. I get home that night around 9 p.m. and the private investigator called me. She had footage of my wife and this guy embracing each other outside the hotel, kissing for about 15 minutes before getting into a cab together and leaving. My world came crashing down. That very moment, I sat in my living room almost lifelessly pondering how to proceed from here. That's when I decided there is only one thing I can do now is file for divorce. But I wasn't going to let her know that I was filing for divorce. That night, I started researching laws related to adultery as well as divorce laws in my state. And which is Arizona to my surprise. It's a Class 3 misdemeanor, but I didn't want to do that. I found a lawyer and met with her right away. I told a lawyer I already had a private investigator on the job and I gave the lawyer some of the footage the private investigator had and she will be giving me more footage. I paid the retainer to the lawyer and she said she will help me proceed with the divorce when I am ready and also get her more proof of my wife's infidelity. So after leaving the lawyer's office, my private investigator has sent me a text asking me to call her. So I did. She tells me she is going to end the investigation. I asked her why. She says what I am about to send to you is probably enough for you to divorce your wife. My heart just started racing. She sends me a clip of them having sex in the back of a rental car. And she says if you want more footage, she can, but reiterated that she really didn't need to go any further. And I agreed. But after she said that, she told me she was going to find out who this guy was and get information on him as well. At this point, I was so broken. My heart just stopped beating at the sight of this video. My wife was soon to come back in 4 days. So I had to start planning on what I needed to do as soon as possible. One of the first things I did was remove her from all of my credit cards. She hardly used them, but just a precaution. I removed her second. She was the beneficiary on my insurance policy. Moved her from being a beneficiary and made my mom the beneficiary temporarily to my credit. We never commingled funds, meaning we always had separate bank accounts. So I didn't need to do anything there since we both owned the house. I knew I couldn't just kick her out. So I asked my lawyer, what should I do in this situation? She said the house is community property and will be split between both parties. Once my lawyer told me that I started looking for another place to stay and found a place that was close to my mom's house. Fast forward a day. I get a call from my private investigator. She tells me that my wife's AP is married, owns a used car dealership and has 2 kids and has another business with someone else. She told me she sent a packet to me with all of his information and his address. So that day I had my lawyer file for divorce on the grounds of adultery and I started packing my things. My soon-to-be ex-wife was due to come back in 2 days. The next step was to get this packet to this guy's wife and get it to her before he returns. I got off work that evening and went to her house and knocked on the door. She answered through her Ring doorbell asking who I was and what I wanted. I just came out and said, "Ma'am, I think your husband is having an affair with my wife and I have proof." Needless to say, her door opened with lightning speed. When I saw her, I just handed her the packet and walked away. The next day, my wife was scheduled to come home. So that morning, I took off work to move some of my things to storage just to be out of the house until my apartment was ready. I had to stay with my mom for a few weeks until then. The next step was to get home with the second packet before my wife did and leave it on the dining room table for her to see. I was pretty much moved out by then. I eventually got home before my wife did and left the packet on the table. By the time 7 p.m. rolled around, I had over 200 calls on my phone and double that amount in text messages. She called me and sent me text messages up until midnight. I didn't answer her calls or respond to her text messages. I was mad and done at the same time. A few days later, my wife was served with divorce papers and I did not hear from her when she did get them. Fast forward a week, and my attorney calls me and says my soon-to-be ex-wife isn't asking for anything too crazy in the divorce. No alimony. She just wants 1 car and her half of the equity in the house at the divorce hearing. It was quick and painless. We agreed to split the equity in the home. I agreed to give her one of the cars we owned and we agreed to split some of the belongings in the house. About 4 months after the divorce, I learned that my ex-wife's AP was arrested on federal fraud charges. Apparently he was fraudulently obtaining government contracts with his business partner. And I also learned that my ex-wife never stopped seeing her AP even when she was blowing up my phone that night and professing her love for me. 2 months later, we sold the house and split the equity we had in the house. When I was at the closing, she was trying to talk to me. I simply told her we don't have anything to discuss outside of the sale of the house. After that I never heard from or saw her again. Last I heard she was still a flight attendant and she may have been involved in her PS fraud case. When I got this story, I was told to leave the names out for privacy reasons. In my opinion, I don't think I would have spent $7,000 for a private investigator, but his private investigator had to travel to get proof, which really didn't matter anyway because his ex-wife only wanted a few things including the equity in the home. I imagine he recouped that $7,000 he spent from the sale of the house. I don't think he was in this case, in my personal opinion, I think he handled the situation the best way he thought he should have handled it. He didn't lose a lot of money and his divorce was quick and painless.